There are those that state the grandfather, mighty Nurgle, loves Typhus more than our true lord, Mortarion. But a grandsire can make jealousy in his offspring, so as to bring greater competition, greater achievement. Thus it is with the grandsire of us all, bountiful Nurgle. He merely plays with his underlings as any avuncular god should, for he does love us all. But it would be an error to believe that he loves Typhus most, for in his truest son, in our own sire, Mortarion, is the ultimate expression of Nurgle's fecund brilliance. For was it not our Primarch, our dark and terrible lord, who made this, the most splendid expression of Nurgle's love? The Plagueburst crawler. After our unbridled love of the grandfather and his many poxes and gifts, it is our greatest weapon. I was Margos Daravius, an Astartes of the Deathguard, a servant of the Imperium, a slave to the Emperor of mankind and all of his lies. Now I am Ebolox the Ferryman, my new name given to me by my master. He is a true disciple of the grandfather, and I am his right hand. I am his meat grinder, his revenge and his wrath. I am his most trusted servant, above all. He points, and I am his fury unleashed. I destroy all before me at his behest, and he has designated this place as forfeit. A smaller system, a barely defended outpost of our enemies. A single solitary orb in the night, looking out, scanning, searching, observing, recording. But not after today. It is time to put out the eyes of the enemy, to blind them. They are defended, of course, but that is why I, Ebolox the Ferryman, have been sent. I look down on the defences, the concentric circles of rockcrete and hardpoints, bunkers and barbed wire, adequate against anyone else. The defenders are of the guard, honourable men all. I can only hope that some may see the grandeur of the grandfather. But it is not to be assumed. Their conditioning is so very tight, so well entrenched. So I give no quarter. Those who will be enlightened will do so at the whim of the grandfather. And I attack with abandon. The blue lines of humans rank up as best they can and fire. They are better than they have any right to be, just as they are. Tidy blue uniforms, tidy little minds. They are fodder for the scythe, but they really are very accurate. My first forays are given over to discerning where they are strong. We herd a never-ending supply of the poxed to lurch across the approaches. Tidal waves of barely animated fresh claws and spite. The guard are solid. Despite their predicament, they are organized and almost valiant. Almost. For the screaming soon starts, a balm to my weary soul. For as the poxwalkers were advancing, absorbing the rage from the defenders' guns, my Plagueburst crawlers were being brought up. Artillery is the king of the battlefield, as they say. In these things, the master stroke of our Primarch's mind, the Plagueburst crawlers, all of the nightmares of the enemy are realized. The line of crawlers makes it into firing range and then stops, as I have instructed. I wait for a moment, allowing the last major push of the poxed to finish its rampage into their blocks of orderly men. But now their fury is almost spent. I order the volleys to begin, and thus they do. Dull wet thuds resound across the front and echo around as they fire. The shot soars into the air and then comes down again. Explosions plume above the squares of guard, amongst them, beside them. They're hailed in fire and shrapnel, and a thick green smog. As more of the explosions flash and blocks go from standing proud to shuddering, and then breaking. Men and women casting aside their rifles as they tear at their rebreathers and faces. The injured explode in fountains of filth. The survivors splashed with this bile, then choke and cough as well. The green fog over the battlefield finds its way into their clothes, their skin, into their lungs, into their eyes. They are staggering and falling down. I order the advance of the rhinos, our men inside. We will clear this section and then move forward. The entropy cannons disrupting the curtain walls as they move forward, bringing them down. The crawlers easily make it over the resultant rubble and smashed holes, onward into the next ring of defences. It will not go any differently there either. We will close this eye of the corpse god, for it is almost time. The crusade is about to be called. We are soon to be unleashed. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we are to take a look at a weapon of war designed by a Primarch, no less. And not anyone, oh no. For today, we delve into the produce of a truly deranged and spiteful soul. For we are to discuss the Plagueburst crawlers of the Deathguard, the manifestations of Mortarian's hate. Now I have a particular detestation of these vehicles, but we shall get onto that later. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Plagueburst crawlers. Mortarian himself perfected the designs for the first Plagueburst crawlers as a labour of pure spite. The Death Lord sought to create a superlative mobile artillery piece that would outclass any comparative Imperial weapon, and thus demonstrate the Deathguard's superiority over their corpse-worshipping former kin. For months, he locked himself away in the smog-wreathed spires of the Black Manse, obsessing endlessly over his foul brainchild, turning all of his remarkable intellect to the challenge. The resultant demon engines reflect well the values of the nightmarish figure that created them. Plagueburst crawlers are lumbering, formidable siege tanks, whose huge ram blades, thick armour plating, and demonic energies provide them with incredible resilience. Their fearsome Plagueburst mortars boast a parabolic firing arc and terrifying range, while the shells they fire combine high-radius explosives with lethal clouds of corrosive spores to inflict damage comparable to that of Imperial Demolisher cannons. The drawback of this weapon is in its inability to fire at targets that are closer than its minimum range. However, the remainder of the crawler's weaponry is intended to slaughter the foe up close, spraying diseased slime and hails of viral shells at any who approach. Mortarian's decision to make these vehicles demon engines says much for his contempt for all living things. Live crew, even Deathguard, might be injured or slain, or suffer an all-too-human error of judgment in battle. By comparison, though great effort is required to bind a demon within each Plagueburst crawler, once installed, the possessing entities tirelessly obey their masters and, by extension, the will of Mortarian. Plagueburst crawlers are not swift vehicles, even running at full power. Yet, their advance is as grinding and relentless as the Deathguard themselves. Intended to support infantry offensive, Plagueburst crawlers plough forward like huge mechanical slugs. their mortars firing with metronomic regularity. Shell after shell whistles down to explode amidst the enemy ranks. Every shot spreads billowing clouds of lethal spores amidst shock waves of fire and shrapnel. An area under sustained bombardment from these weapons becomes so saturated with foul spore clouds that it is inimical to all life. Armor provides scant protection, for the demon spores chew through ventilator grills and enviroseals, corrode the thickest adamantium plating, and wear through rockcrete layer by layer until they spill into even the deepest and most well-protected bunkers. These hideous effects have made the Plagueburst crawlers a much-hated weapon of war. Enemies strive to destroy them at any cost, whilst even the demons of Nurgle look at them askance. After all, where the Plagueburst crawlers strike, there can be no cycle of rebirth, no matter how foul. For its victims, there is only everlasting death. End quote. The Plagueburst crawler. A surprisingly versatile monster on the battlefield, and one I am all too acquainted with, much to the lament of my forces, and my utter joy as a player of said whittle men. For one of my main playmates is Lex, the hairy one, and his Deathguard army can be an utter scourge. Now the Plague Crawler is a pain to face, for it can fire indirectly. For, as I have outlined before, this gives you a huge advantage, and can really wreck the day of some armies. Mine own HQs have been pulled out of placement and then bombed into oblivion by these horrors, I can assure you. Silly old me. But they can be outfitted in multiple ways. You can arm them with the vicious entropy cannon that cuts through armor and elites alike. These added to the main weapons can really inflict carnage on transports, armor, or dreadnoughts. But the annoyance of these things is that they can also be armed with plague spitters. So, you manage to either deep strike or maneuver a unit within striking distance of this nasty. Then you find that its flamer effects of the plague spitters pulls the heart out of your unit before it even hits. So you have to be very careful. You know which variant of the crawler you are about to cast. With their disgustingly resilient ability, perfectly reflecting the bounty of Nurgle, and their demonic save, it can make them exceptionally difficult to remove from the board. So even when you tailor your army, which I do not really advise, to firing a truckload of heavy weapons at them, they still do not go down swiftly or easily. All the while moving forward, all the while annihilating your men with their horrific feculent firepower. But through all of this, I can tell you one thing. When you do manage to get one off the table, it is a thing to celebrate. Win, lose, or draw, if you take out one of these things, it is always a thing to be noted. And I can attest, it can feel good. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to Plagueburst Crawlers of the Deathguard. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.